Christian Horner sues Red Bull for unfair dismissal. Stay until the end to find out how much money he's demanding in compensation. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. In what has rapidly evolved into an unprecedented and volatile escalation of one of the most explosive controversies in recent Formula One memory, the embattled former team principal of Red Bull Racing, Christian Horner, has formally initiated legal proceedings that could send aftershocks through the very core of the motorsport industry. The British figurehead, once celebrated as the strategic mastermind behind one of the most dominant dynasties in the hybrid era, has now filed a jaw-dropping, headline-dominating lawsuit against his former employers. Valued at an extraordinary $40 million, the claim alleges not only wrongful dismissal but also paints a portrait of betrayal, internal sabotage, and a deliberate, orchestrated attempt to irreparably damage his global reputation after more than 2 decades of unwavering service. What initially simmered as a quiet behind-closed-doors dispute has now exploded into a legal inferno, dragging Red Bull into the crosshairs of both judicial scrutiny and a firestorm of public speculation. Filed in a High Court of Justice in London under conditions of high confidentiality and intense legal maneuvering, the lawsuit marks a dramatic turning point in what was previously presumed to be a finalized internal shakeup. Leaks from sources close to the legal filing have begun making their way into the hands of well-connected journalists, and the content of these revelations is nothing short of explosive. Horner's legal team is alleging a serious breach of a fundamental provision written into his long-term contract, a contractual safeguard that was intended to protect high-ranking personnel from arbitrary dismissal. At the center of this clause was a stipulation guaranteeing due process, requiring a fair, impartial, and externally supervised investigation prior to any punitive action or termination. According to Horner's claims, this procedure was not merely circumvented, it was deliberately ignored. The lawsuit outlines a timeline in which internal boardroom pressure, fueled by sensationalist media leaks and shareholder agitation, created a snowballing environment of panic and haste. Rather than allowing the investigation to reach its natural and unbiased conclusion, Horner maintains that key figures within Red Bull's upper management moved swiftly, and without full transparency, to sever ties with him. He asserts that the decision-making process lacked legal grounding and was manipulated by factions inside the company intent on ousting him for political reasons. His lawyers are accusing Red Bull of not only violating the letter of the law but breaching the spirit of fair corporate governance, thereby triggering legal grounds for extensive financial restitution and reputational reparation. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Beyond the money, an eye-watering $40 million sum that includes unpaid bonuses, damages for breach of contract, and calculated loss of future income. The deeper implication lies in the reputational war now being waged. Horner's legal team is making the extraordinary claim that a campaign of defamation was systematically initiated by individuals within Red Bull's structure, with the intention of not only expelling him from the team but also ensuring that his career in Formula One, and possibly the wider world of international motorsport, would never recover. This alleged smear campaign, according to documents being prepared for court, involved calculated leaks to media outlets, the selective release of sensitive internal information, and what one insider described as a coordinated effort to morally discredit him in the eyes of sponsors, stakeholders, and the global audience. The fallout is already reverberating. Sponsors are reportedly demanding clarity from Red Bull's new management team. Certain partners, especially those with public-facing brand images tied to integrity and transparency, are said to be closely monitoring the legal proceedings before deciding whether to continue long-term commercial relationships with the team. The broader F1 paddock is abuzz with speculation, not only about the veracity of Horner's claims, but about the internal power dynamics that led to this catastrophic public unraveling. Whispers of internal feuds, long-simmering rivalries, and covert boardroom alliances have added an element of palace intrigue to the already combustible saga. Some observers are going as far as to say that this scandal could create irreversible cracks in the internal foundations of Red Bull's motorsport empire. Behind the scenes, Red Bull Racing has maintained a tense silence, issuing only carefully worded public statements affirming their belief in the propriety and fairness of their internal disciplinary process. However, insiders close to the situation report significant turmoil within the team's upper echelons. Senior executives are said to be engaged in daily crisis meetings, desperately strategizing how to contain the reputational damage while preserving the team's competitive focus as the season progresses. There is also growing concern among some Red Bull personnel that if the lawsuit progresses to a full public trial, a trove of confidential internal communications, emails, text messages, transcripts of internal meetings, could be subpoenaed and made available to the public, potentially revealing a web of corporate dysfunction far wider than initially suspected. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Meanwhile, Horner himself has adopted a remarkably composed, if defiant, public stance. Though he has yet to speak in depth to the media, those within his inner circle describe a man determined to reclaim not only financial compensation, but narrative control over a story that has spiraled far beyond his grasp. His legal team, reportedly consisting of some of the UK's most formidable employment and defamation specialists, is preparing for an aggressive, high-profile battle that could stretch out for months, if not years, depending on the court's rulings. The stakes are colossal. If Horner prevails, it could set a precedent across the sport and within high-level corporate environments for how termination cases involving senior executives are handled. If he loses, his legacy risks being permanently shadowed by the scandal, regardless of its legal technicalities. The Formula One world, already a cauldron of egos, billion-dollar deals, and cutthroat ambition, finds itself watching this legal conflict unfold with a mix of morbid fascination and growing apprehension. Every new court filing, every leaked detail, every lawyer's comment will be dissected not just by fans and journalists, but by rival teams, sponsors, and stakeholders evaluating their own vulnerability to similar internal disputes. It is no longer merely a legal disagreement. It has become a litmus test for the ethical core of a sport that prides itself on precision, innovation, and spectacle. Christian Horner's name, once associated almost solely with victory parades, team radio celebrations, and championship photo shoots, is now equally linked to legal intrigue, boardroom warfare, and the unforgiving glare of scandal. Whether this is the last desperate gasp of a fallen titan or the early stages of a stunning personal redemption arc, one thing is certain: the world is watching, and the engines of controversy are just getting started. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. What adds fuel to this already scorching legal conflagration is the explosive accusation at the heart of Christian Horner's lawsuit, a claim that strikes not only at the core of Red Bull Racing's integrity but at the very structure of trust between employer and employee. Horner asserts that the organization he helped build into a modern motorsport dynasty deliberately and strategically orchestrated the erosion of his public image. According to the legal documents filed by his team of high-profile attorneys, Red Bull didn't merely fail to defend him. They made a conscious, cold, and calculated choice to let the firestorm consume him. The refusal to issue clarifications, rebuttals, or even the most basic denials in response to a barrage of deeply damaging and scandalous headlines, he contends, wasn't an oversight or internal miscommunication. It was a weapon. A tool of strategic humiliation, designed to weaken his standing in the court of public opinion and render his eventual dismissal palatable, even welcomed. For weeks before the formal termination, British media outlets engaged in a relentless high-decibel campaign filled with insinuations, suggestive language, and innuendo that painted a damning portrait of Horner's alleged conduct within the team. Sensational headlines from prominent tabloids such as The Sun, The Mirror, and the Daily Mail dominated news cycles, each iteration more salacious than the last. Vague references to inappropriate messages, hushed meetings behind closed doors, and internal HR complaints involving a female Red Bull Racing employee were published with dramatic flair but conspicuously little evidence. The stories, while lacking formal corroboration, generated an unmistakable wave of public intrigue and quiet corporate discomfort. The damage was immediate, insidious, and difficult to quantify. Fans speculated wildly. Sponsors began to make cautious inquiries. Rival teams distanced themselves from public comments. And through it all, Red Bull, the very organization that had once rallied behind Horner as its talismanic leader, remained ominously silent. That silence, Horner alleges, was not accidental. It was engineered. His legal complaint outlines a narrative in which Red Bull's upper echelon, particularly those newly empowered after a series of internal leadership changes, made a deliberate choice to avoid addressing the stories publicly, thereby allowing their implications to metastasize. This, the lawsuit insists, was no mere lapse in PR strategy. It was a premeditated act of character assassination. His lawyers argue that by withholding official responses or clarifications, Red Bull signaled to the world that the allegations were credible, or at least not worth contesting. In doing so, they all but endorsed the narrative taking shape in the press, that Horner was a liability. A man whose behavior made him expendable. A leader whose personal life had spiraled into scandal, making his continued presence at the helm both controversial and unsustainable. The legal team's case is built not merely on media analysis but on what they describe as concrete, damning internal communications, emails, messages, and meeting notes now in Horner's possession through legal discovery. Some of these communications, according to sources close to the litigation, contain language that suggests certain Red Bull executives weighed public optics above procedural fairness. In one such exchange reportedly cited in the filing, a high-ranking official allegedly remarked that narrative control outweighs internal discomfort, a phrase that, if authenticated, could serve as a devastating indictment of the organization's priorities during the scandal. Another internal memo is said to reference letting the storm burn out, implying a decision to ride the wave of negative publicity without intervening, possibly in hopes that the situation would resolve itself through Horner's self-destruction. Horner's camp frames this as clear evidence of a strategic campaign, not just to discredit, but to delegitimize. To strip him of the moral and professional authority he had built over decades. To reduce his legacy to a footnote wrapped in scandal. The complaint alleges that Red Bull knowingly allowed these inflammatory and largely unsubstantiated claims to fester in the public arena without challenge, knowing full well that silence would be interpreted as acknowledgement. And that interpretation, they argue, was exactly what the company wanted. The implications extend far beyond Horner's personal reputation. This legal saga has rapidly evolved into a referendum on corporate ethics, media manipulation, and the weaponization of silence. If his claims are upheld, it would suggest that one of Formula One's most successful institutions actively chose perception over truth, optics over loyalty, and convenience over justice. It would expose a ruthless corporate culture where internal rivalries are settled not through boardroom discussions, but through reputational attrition conducted in the public sphere. A culture where character can be sacrificed on the altar of branding, and loyalty can be revoked the moment it becomes inconvenient. For Horner, this is not just about wrongful termination. It is about legacy reclamation. It is a battle to reassert his identity in a world that was invited to demolish it piece by piece. The damage, he argues, is already immeasurable. Professional relationships have been compromised. Media narratives have ossified into public memory. Family life has been invaded and strained under the weight of unproven headlines. Sponsors have distanced themselves. Future opportunities may already be closed. What remains to be seen is whether the courtroom will become the arena for his redemption, or the final chapter in a dramatic fall from grace that was, according to him, not just permitted by Red Bull, but meticulously constructed by it. Individuals with intimate knowledge of the unfolding conflict have described Christian Horner's emotional state as deeply wounded. Some even go so far as to characterize him as emotionally shattered by what he perceives as a calculated and heartless betrayal by the very organization he helped construct from nothing. For Horner, this wasn't simply a job, nor was it just about overseeing an F1 team. It was a lifelong mission, a deeply personal odyssey that spanned decades of tireless commitment, strategic brilliance, and relentless dedication. From the moment Red Bull Racing was founded, Horner was the guiding hand behind its meteoric rise, from an experimental energy drink-branded outfit into one of the most dominant forces in modern motorsport history. He orchestrated its transformation through countless battles against some of the most formidable adversaries in Formula One, including powerhouse teams like McLaren, the relentless dominance of Mercedes, and the storied prestige of Ferrari. In the eyes of many, Horner wasn't just a team principal, he was Red Bull Racing's soul, its architect, its compass. He was instrumental in identifying and nurturing generational talents, playing an irreplaceable role in elevating drivers such as Sebastian Vettel, who brought the team its first wave of championship glory, and Max Verstappen, whose ascent has carved out a new era of success. Horner's influence was visible in every facet of the operation, from driver development strategies to sponsor negotiations, media handling, inter-team dynamics, and high-stakes political maneuvering within the volatile world of the FIA and Formula One management. For him, Red Bull was more than an employer. It was a manifestation of his life's work, a deeply interwoven legacy that stretched across 2 decades of racing history. Yet despite that legacy, Horner now finds himself on the outside, discarded in a manner that sources close to the situation describe as abrupt, surgical, and devastatingly impersonal. According to those familiar with the details, he received no heartfelt explanations, no honest conversations, no dignified farewell. Instead, what awaited him was a wall of silence, an eerie absence of communication, and ultimately, what Horner himself has reportedly called a cold-blooded political execution. This phrase, allegedly used by Horner in private conversations, underscores the deep sense of betrayal he feels, not just because of the outcome, but because of the process, or rather, the complete lack of it. He had hoped for dialogue. He had pleaded for clarity. He had offered multiple olive branches in the form of quiet behind-closed-doors resolutions. One of the most significant of these attempts was a formal request for a face-to-face meeting with top-level executives from Red Bull GmbH in Salzburg. This meeting, which was meant to be a chance for frank discussion and reconciliation, was inexplicably cancelled just hours before it was scheduled to occur, leaving Horner humiliated and bewildered. That cancellation, according to sources, was the final emotional blow, confirmation that the decision had already been made and that his voice no longer held weight in the corridors of power he once roamed with absolute authority. Now, in the legal battlefield that has followed, Horner is not merely seeking financial compensation. He is demanding acknowledgement, recognition, and restitution for what he describes as a complete erosion of professional respect and personal dignity. The sum being pursued, which exceeds $40 million, reflects not only the remaining balance of his ironclad contract, which was due to expire at the end of the 2027 season, but also the abrupt termination of bonus structures tied to performance milestones, alleged character defamation, and punitive damages for the immense emotional and reputational toll he claims to have endured as a result of the fallout. The legal documents submitted are extensive and meticulously compiled, containing a chronological reconstruction of the chain of events that led to his ousting. They feature a collection of internal communications, email exchanges among key figures within Red Bull senior leadership, and sworn testimonies from external witnesses, each adding layers of depth to a case that, if exposed in full detail to the public, could severely tarnish the team's image and destabilize the internal structure of one of Formula One's most powerful entities. The stakes are colossal, and the consequences, potentially seismic. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere within Red Bull is reportedly tense and clouded by anxiety. Several senior members of the team, including individuals whose reputations and careers are intertwined with Horner's trajectory, are said to be quietly assembling their own legal teams, bracing for the possibility of being named or implicated in future depositions. There is growing speculation that certain internal dynamics, long concealed under the protective veil of Red Bull's outward success, may come to light in explosive detail during courtroom proceedings, triggering a domino effect that could redefine relationships, roles, and hierarchies within the organization. What began as a quiet internal dispute has now escalated into a sprawling, high-stakes legal saga with the potential to expose long-hidden power struggles, diverging interests, and festering tensions that have simmered just beneath the surface of Red Bull's public dominance. For Christian Horner, this is more than a battle over a contract. It is a fight for justice, legacy, and redemption. And for Red Bull, it is a test of resilience, one that may determine whether their internal cohesion can survive the public scrutiny and internal disruption that this ordeal threatens to unleash. Red Bull Racing's decision to maintain public silence in the face of the growing legal firestorm surrounding Christian Horner's abrupt departure has not gone unnoticed, and the absence of any official rebuttal or statement of defense is rapidly becoming its own headline. The lack of communication from the team, especially one known for its media prowess and controlled narratives, is beginning to raise red flags across the motorsport industry, legal circles, and among key stakeholders. While some observers initially speculated that the quiet approach was part of a calculated legal strategy, an increasing number of high-profile employment law experts in the United Kingdom are now suggesting that the silence might actually reflect something far more troubling: a genuine fear that Red Bull may have made a critical procedural misstep that could leave them legally and financially vulnerable. This isn't a minor HR dispute. This is rapidly snowballing into what could become one of the most complex, expensive, and reputation-damaging legal sagas in the recent history of Formula One. Legal professionals with deep experience in employment contracts and dismissal protocols are already dissecting the limited information that has emerged. The speculation is rampant that Red Bull may have proceeded with Horner's removal without fully honoring the terms embedded within his original employment agreement, specifically those clauses governing due process, internal investigation procedures, and exit compensation frameworks. One particularly prominent solicitor with a background in high-profile sports litigation went on record to say that if even a fraction of Horner's assertions regarding the breach of procedural fairness hold weight, then Red Bull could be facing not only a lengthy arbitration or court process, but a complete unraveling of their corporate legal safeguards. Words like reckless, negligent, and even corporate malpractice are now beginning to circulate in confidential legal memos and whispered paddock conversations. Behind closed doors, the ripple effects of this saga are being felt with increasing intensity. What began as an internal conflict is now evolving into an organizational crisis that threatens to engulf more than just the upper management. According to sources with direct ties to Milton Keynes, the internal environment has become fraught with tension, confusion, and rising paranoia. Meetings have turned quiet and terse. Internal communications are being scrutinized. Morale among long-standing staff members is reportedly deteriorating, as uncertainty looms over who made the key decisions, who signed off on them, and whether proper oversight was ever in place. Engineers, strategists, and mid-tier executives, many of whom had developed long-standing professional relationships with Horner, are now caught in a fog of legal ambiguity and unanswered questions, unsure if they too may face scrutiny, fallout, or be forced to pick sides in what is increasingly being referred to as a contractual implosion. What makes this situation even more volatile is the external pressure mounting from powerful stakeholders. Formula One Management, FOM, and the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, FIA, the two most influential governing bodies in global motorsport, are reportedly monitoring the situation with growing concern. For them, the implications stretch far beyond Red Bull's paddock garage. As one of the most successful and visible teams on the grid, Red Bull Racing represents a significant portion of Formula One's public image and financial ecosystem. Any major controversy, especially one rooted in allegations of mishandled termination or unethical dismissal, could erode the credibility of the sport's operational standards. High-ranking FIA officials are reportedly preparing contingency statements in case they are compelled to step in and conduct their own review, while FOM executives are privately voicing alarm over the potential blowback from global sponsors and broadcast partners. And those corporate partners are not staying silent either. Major sponsors affiliated with Red Bull Racing, some of whom have invested tens of millions in branding, hospitality rights, and technology partnerships, are now pressing for answers. Several were allegedly blindsided by the decision to remove Horner, having received no prior consultation, briefing, or risk assessment. For these multinational corporations, whose reputations are tightly linked to their involvement in Formula One, transparency is not optional, it's essential. The sudden absence of dialogue from Red Bull's commercial department has only deepened concerns, with at least one major sponsor now reportedly reviewing its contractual exit clauses should the legal entanglement spiral further out of control. For them, the equation is simple: controversy equals risk, and risk equals lost market value. From within the Red Bull empire itself, leaks are beginning to emerge, anonymously, carefully, but tellingly. One source close to the senior technical leadership, speaking under strict confidentiality, painted a bleak picture of a team that no longer knows who's making decisions or why. It's like walking into a building where the fire alarms are all ringing and no one's calling the fire department, the source said. There's panic, but it's silent. No one wants to say the wrong thing. Everyone's waiting for someone to take control, but there's no clarity on who's in charge of damage control, or even if damage control has begun. Another individual within the team described the environment as fractured, noting that loyalties are now divided between those who supported Horner's vision and those aligning with the current leadership vacuum. Some employees have reportedly begun consulting personal legal counsel, not knowing whether their own communications or internal roles may become subject to investigation or subpoena should litigation commence. At the core of all this remains a fundamental question: was Christian Horner, a figure instrumental in Red Bull Racing's transformation from a mid-grid outfit to a championship juggernaut, removed in violation of his legal protections? If the answer turns out to be yes, the consequences for Red Bull's brand, management structure, and long-term stability could be catastrophic. This goes beyond financial damages or potential settlements, though those are expected to be significant if a court finds Red Bull at fault. This is about the erosion of organizational trust, the implosion of procedural credibility, and the lingering stain that such a public and preventable failure would leave on a team that has prided itself on excellence, efficiency, and innovation. There's also the looming question of what Horner himself intends to do next. Thus far, he has remained relatively quiet in the media, issuing only a handful of carefully worded statements through legal representatives. But behind that silence, legal teams are reportedly working non-stop, gathering documentation, compiling communication records, and preparing a case that some believe could shake Red Bull Racing to its very core. The deeper they dig, the more questions emerge. Were internal protocols properly followed? Were ethics committees consulted? Did the board act independently, or were there external pressures influencing the decision? Each layer of inquiry brings new uncertainty, and each day without a clear narrative from Red Bull allows speculation to grow more virulent. Meanwhile, the rest of the Formula One world watches with bated breath. Drivers, team principals, engineers, and journalists are all waiting to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. The sport thrives on competition, speed, and precision, but in moments like this, it's political maneuvering, legal brinkmanship, and corporate accountability that steal the spotlight. What Red Bull does, or fails to do, in the next few weeks will not only determine the outcome of a legal case, but could redefine the internal power dynamics of the team for a generation. There are no pit stops in a crisis like this. Only choices. And the cost of making the wrong one could be immeasurable. To make an already explosive situation even more volatile, Christian Horner has made it abundantly clear, through both actions and attitude, that he has no intention of going quietly, retreating into the shadows, or accepting blame for something he vehemently believes was orchestrated behind closed doors by individuals with ulterior motives and hidden agendas. According to those in his closest inner circle, friends who have stood by him not just in recent months but over the course of decades, Horner is not in damage control mode. He's in battle mode. Every fiber of his being is reportedly focused on not just defending his reputation, but launching a counteroffensive so calculated and relentless that it could send shockwaves through every corridor of power in Formula One. This is no temporary public relations scramble. This is a personal war. A mission to reclaim control of a narrative he believes was hijacked by those threatened by his influence, destabilized by his power, or envious of his long-standing dominance within one of the most competitive environments in global sport. Sources close to the situation describe Horner as deeply hurt, but even more profoundly enraged. Not the explosive theatrical rage that burns out in headlines, but the cold, patient, strategic fury of someone who has spent his entire professional life mastering complex systems, navigating media pressure, and playing political chess at the highest level. He isn't simply looking to survive the scandal, he is meticulously crafting a blueprint for full vindication. And he isn't doing it alone. He has reportedly assembled what some are calling a strike team of legal and intelligence professionals, an elite cadre of attorneys specializing in defamation, employment law, and international corporate governance, a top-tier crisis public relations firm with connections to legacy media and high-level influencers, a cutting-edge digital forensics company tasked with recovering, preserving, and analyzing sensitive communications and metadata, and most controversially, a private investigator. With deep ties in motorsport circles, someone who allegedly has been tasked with uncovering not only the truth, but the players behind the curtain. Insiders suggest that Horner is collecting receipts, emails, text chains, internal memos, off-record conversations, and possibly even audio files. Every document, every detail, every overlooked timestamp is reportedly being combed through with forensic intensity, as he prepares not just a legal defense, but an offensive dossier that could implicate individuals far beyond the initial scope of the controversy. He is, according to one longtime associate, building a nuclear option. Not because he necessarily wants to use it, but because he refuses to be outmaneuvered by what he views as a coordinated campaign designed to ruin not just his image, but his legacy. And the longer the silence from certain power brokers within the paddock persists, the more Horner appears determined to make sure that if he goes down, others will go with him. But perhaps the most provocative element of Horner's campaign isn't the legal wrangling or the behind-the-scenes investigation. It's the rumors swirling about a potential tell-all book that could shatter the fragile, carefully curated myths of the Formula One world. Publishing insiders claim that Horner has already met with multiple ghostwriters, some with backgrounds in political exposés, others with experience in investigative journalism. The alleged working manuscript is said to be a sweeping, no-holds-barred account of not just the recent scandal, but his entire journey through the sport, from his early days building Red Bull racing from the ground up, to the fierce rivalries that shaped title battles, to the unseen negotiations, betrayals, and personal vendettas that rarely make it to the cameras. It wouldn't just be a memoir. It would be a time bomb. If published, the book could lift the veil on internal conflicts that were once mere whispers in hospitality suites, rumors of boardroom rifts, power struggles between Red Bull's racing and corporate divisions, covert clashes between drivers, tense sponsorship battles, strategic leaks to the press, and hidden tensions between Horner and other team principals who, on the surface, maintained a veneer of mutual respect but privately fought tooth and nail for every advantage. He's reportedly considering naming names, revealing timelines, and sharing documents, perhaps even photographs, that could dismantle the reputations of individuals who have remained untouchable for years. And beyond the drama, it would serve as a historic artifact, a first-hand account of the modern era of Formula One from one of its most influential architects, told with unfiltered candor and a clear sense of vengeance. What makes this even more compelling is Horner's apparent awareness of how narratives are formed, and more importantly, how they're weaponized. He understands the rhythm of media cycles, the power of public sympathy, the volatility of fan culture. He knows when to speak, when to remain silent, and when to strategically leak fragments of information to ignite speculation. If this is a battle for public perception as much as it is for professional survival, Horner appears determined to win it through timing, precision, and firepower. Every appearance, every withheld statement, every smirk caught on camera seems carefully calibrated. He's not panicking, he's plotting. While critics argue he's desperate or delusional, those who know him best say this is when he's most dangerous, when he's been pushed into a corner and has something to prove. And right now, what he wants to prove is that those who thought they could erase him have gravely underestimated the scope of his reach, the depth of his preparation, and the scale of his ambition. The chessboard has been set. The clock is ticking. And Christian Horner isn't retreating. He's advancing, quietly, deliberately, and with the full force of someone who has been wronged and has no intention of being silent about it. With the official filing of the lawsuit now confirmed and the global motorsport community holding its collective breath in anticipation, the atmosphere surrounding the paddock has shifted from one of hushed whispers to deafening tension. Every team principal, every journalist, every fan glued to the developments knows that what unfolds in the coming days and weeks could alter not only the trajectory of Red Bull racing but the entire landscape of Formula One as we know it. This is no longer a private conflict confined to boardroom debates or internal power struggles. It has erupted into a legal battle of unprecedented scale, intensity, and consequence. What was once speculated as a matter of internal friction has now become an open, escalating confrontation fueled by power, betrayal, ego, and a thirst for justice that refuses to be silenced. Red Bull, a team that has long prided itself on operational excellence, strategic dominance, and an almost untouchable public image, now finds itself cornered in a storm of controversy it can no longer control. The legal complaint, packed with allegations and implications that shake the foundation of the team's leadership structure, has ignited a wildfire that even the most seasoned crisis managers would struggle to contain. And yet, as the world waits for Red Bull's official legal response, their calculated silence grows more ominous with each passing hour. Legal analysts are dissecting every detail, every delay, every procedural move, with some suggesting that this lack of immediate reply may signal a sophisticated negotiation tactic, a strategy to buy time, gather intelligence, and strike back with precision. Others argue that the delay is a symptom of panic, a sign that behind closed doors, Red Bull is scrambling to build a defense airtight enough to withstand the tidal wave of scrutiny heading their way. The speculation is relentless, and the consequences are potentially catastrophic. For Christian Horner, once the charismatic frontman of the Red Bull dynasty, the lawsuit represents more than a legal challenge, it is a public reckoning. His departure from the team, which once could have been brushed off as a change in leadership or a natural career evolution, is now mired in allegations so serious, so deeply entwined with the inner workings of the organization, that the situation feels less like a resignation and more like a coup. Sources close to the case suggest that the allegations involve breaches of trust, abuses of power, and actions that, if proven, could not only permanently tarnish Horner's legacy but also leave deep scars on Red Bull's institutional credibility. Behind the scenes, the pressure is unrelenting. Team personnel are reportedly on edge, engineers and staff avoiding media contact, unsure of what information might surface next. The tension in the Milton Keynes headquarters is said to be palpable, with emergency meetings, confidential legal briefings, and damage control sessions becoming the new normal. Sponsors are quietly demanding answers, wondering whether their brand is at risk of being associated with a scandal that could spiral out of control. Rival teams are watching closely, some with cautious interest, others with thinly veiled satisfaction, knowing that any disruption to Red Bull's invincibility may offer a rare window of opportunity. The legal arena, meanwhile, is preparing for a battle that could drag on for months, perhaps years, with depositions, evidence disclosures, and cross-examinations that promise to expose the raw, unfiltered reality of what has taken place within the walls of one of Formula One's most powerful institutions. And while the FIA remains officially silent for now, the governing body is undoubtedly monitoring the situation with increasing concern. Should the details emerging from this legal confrontation suggest regulatory violations or ethical breaches, the repercussions could go far beyond fines. They could include suspensions, license reviews, or unprecedented sanctions. As documents begin to surface, some leaked, others officially submitted, the media circus intensifies. Anonymous testimonies, alleged emails, covert recordings, and boardroom transcripts are now part of the story. Every detail, no matter how small, is being weaponized in a war for public opinion. Social media platforms are erupting with theories, outrage, and calls for accountability, while traditional media outlets race to confirm leads, verify sources, and publish exposés that peel back the carefully curated image Red Bull has cultivated for years. What makes this all the more explosive is the emotional dimension underpinning the legal framework. This is not just a case of contract disputes or organizational missteps. It is a narrative laced with betrayal, personal vendettas, shattered loyalties, and ambitions that have collided in the most violent manner. Former allies have become adversaries. Once trusted confidants are now potential witnesses. The corridors that once echoed with celebrations of victory now tremble under the weight of accusations, suspicions, and the unrelenting fear of what might be revealed next. And as this saga unfolds, the damage to Red Bull's reputation could prove to be far more devastating than any financial penalty ever imposed by the FIA. The monetary costs, while significant, may pale in comparison to the long-term erosion of trust, the collapse of internal morale, and the irreversible blow to a brand that once stood as the epitome of modern motorsport excellence. Because reputation, once fractured in this way, rarely heals without leaving deep, visible scars. In the coming weeks, every motion filed, every court appearance scheduled, every witness named will add another chapter to a story that has already captivated the motorsport world. The silence from Red Bull cannot last forever. Eventually, they will be forced to respond, publicly, legally, and with a clarity that either defends their position or admits fault. But no matter how this case resolves in the courtroom, the court of public opinion has already begun its proceedings. The world is watching, analyzing, waiting. The motorsport community stands at a crossroads, not just witnessing a scandal but a transformation in how power, responsibility, and ethics intersect at the pinnacle of competition. And Red Bull, once the unshakable force atop the Formula One hierarchy, now finds itself at the center of a storm that shows no signs of dissipating.